Welcome to Out of the Lab, a podcast interviewing entrepreneurs who've taken research out of the lab and built it into a company that's serving the world. These entrepreneurs are heroes, and the planet needs more of them. So tune in, learn from their successes and failures, and get inspired. Visit bountiful.work to join our community and realize your power to save the world. Hello and welcome to Out of the Lab. I'm your host, Max Finder. Today's guest is Yaron Daniely. He is a partner and the head of aMoon Alpha. aMoon is a biotech investment fund here in Israel that has more than $1 billion under management. He is the investment leader at aMoon Velocity, their early stage investment fund. Born in Israel, raised in Florida, Yaron did a PhD at NYU. He was a fellow at the National Institute of Health and did a postdoc fellowship with the American Cancer Society at the Weizmann Institute in Israel. He has an MBA from the Technion, and he co-founded Israel's first MBA program for professionals. He spent 14 years in industry, in part as a CEO, and took a biotech company public on the NASDAQ, where he was then the president and CEO of Yassoon, which is Hebrew University's technology transfer company. And we get into the distinction between a tech transfer office and a tech transfer company. One is a nonprofit, one is a for-profit entity. And we talk about the implications of that in the Israeli ecosystem versus in the rest of the world. He was also the chair of the Israeli Technology Transfer Network, so overseeing all of the different tech transfer entities in Israel, where he was able to implement quite a lot of change that we also talk about in quite a lot of detail. So we get into how he developed an interest in translational research and how he then took that to industry, where he focused on the business side of things, and then developed curricula for scientists to learn about business, how he helped transform the tech transfer industry, including by filling the gaps in the proof of concept funding that was available to new technology inventions and commercial spinouts. We talk about how he was able to identify what technologies and what PIs, what investigators and researchers had the highest chance of creating commercial successes in their endeavors. We also get into quite a lot of detail on incentivizing tech transfer employees and how to increase the volume of licensing deals that these tech transfer offices can do, as well as how to attract high caliber entrepreneurs to join commercialization spinouts. This is a really fast-paced, high-energy discussion from someone who has seen all sides of the ecosystem and is now bridging these gaps, a lot of these gaps, as an investor. It's really quite an exhilarating conversation and tons of nuggets and lessons learned and pieces of wisdom for tech transfer offices, for young entrepreneurs and PhDs, and anyone in industry, and even investors that can all learn from Yaron's experience. So enjoy the episode. Visit bountiful.work, WORK, to join our community. And thanks for tuning in. Yaron, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Max.
So I guess you're now an active investor at aMoon. I'm interested to hear really about the path that you took to get there. I mean, you were previously an entrepreneur. You've also spent time in tech transfer organizations, and now you're an active investor. I guess those are three very distinct and different places to be and leadership roles that you've held. Is there any sort of theme that connects across all three that you think is, and maybe there's even more than one, but something that you carry between all three of these different types of roles that is a guiding principle of sorts?
Yeah. So look, at the end of the day, I'm passionate about translational research. That's what I've always been passionate about, and I think as I made decisions through my career, leaving academia and then going into various roles, I think that the common theme, the common thread, has always been my excitement about truly disruptive translational research and the power of taking something like a disruptive technology and running it as far as it could go. I think as you said, sort of a well-rounded professional, in that I've sat in all seats around the table, done the academic bit, then for a good number of years the biotech and industry bit, then tech transfer, and now on the buy side, on the investor side. And I think actually this is it's quite a privilege, because it allows me to look at opportunities and manage situations from a position of empathy and understanding of the needs, sometimes the very conflicting needs and agendas of the various parties, and really try and make the best and try to make the biggest pie for everyone.
And so when you first got started, you were a PhD student, right? I mean, when did this sort of interest in translational research specifically take root, as opposed to research for the sake of research or more exploratory endeavors?
So I was a PhD student at NYU in the biochemistry department of NYU Medical Center. And I think I realized pretty late in my PhD track that I'm unlikely to stay an academic. There was something about sort of the solitude and the siloed nature of academic research, which is admirable, but also not for everyone. That sort of started to bug me as I thought about, okay, I'm really excited about science, but it's not enough for me. There needs to be more. I did decide to pursue a postdoctoral fellowship after my PhD, because I wanted to see whether independent research would make the difference. If I ran my own project, would that be sufficient for me? But I learned very quickly that was not the case. And pretty early in my postdoc, I enrolled in business school and started pursuing my MBA degree. And if you sort of ask me when was the point when I suddenly realized that my calling was more on the translational side, I think it was then. I was enrolled in an MBA program of the Technion, which is the Israeli sort of Institute of Technology, and this was a track that was focused on folks that are executives or are working already and are interested in entrepreneurship and strategy. And I suddenly found myself really curious and engaged and fascinated by that whole other language and opportunity set that the infusion of the business world into the science world offered. And so as I finished my my postdoc, pretty much in line with finishing my MBA, I knew at that point that I'm gonna really work at the cusp of science and business for the rest of my life.
And what something you said that stuck out for me was the solo nature of the PhD and academia. I mean, is there something that you think we could bring to that would make it more engaged and dynamic with industry? I mean, there's a lot of value, right, for a PhD student to understand, for instance, the size of the market, that if they were to create a product from something that they're investigating, you know, would this market actually be relevant, or is it even potentially too small for a product to even make sense? I mean, are there things that you think nowadays in hindsight might be useful to guide and extract these PhD students from the solo nature of things into a more engaged and dynamic way of investigating?
Yeah, funny that you're asking. So literally yesterday, I participated in the opening session of a course, a program that's called the Bina Innovation Fellows at the Weizmann Institute, where we're actually doing exactly that. We have invited PhD students from across the Weizmann Institute campus, join us in a series of meetings in which we introduce to them the different perspectives, the vocabulary, the considerations, and the opportunities that sort of underlie translational research and sort of taking or commercializing research discovery. So the top campuses around the world today are making these topics, these tools, these perspectives available to those researchers that desire it. It's important to note, I don't think all researchers should, obtain that training, but I think that training and that exposure should be available to all research students and research faculty if they want to pursue it, because I really feel like it opens up a completely different and additive and synergistic level of looking at things, understanding them, and in fact, making an impact that it could be much broader than simply the discovery of a new, scientific observation or solution. Again, not belittling the importance of scientific observation or research, but I think if you went to any scientist and you asked them if they had the opportunity to broaden the impact of their research beyond publication to an area where they can actually impact well-being and society, I don't think anyone would stand by and say, no, I'm good with just publishing in a top-tier journal and moving on.
Yeah, I love that. Like having the goal not just be publishing something, but actually adding value in some real way. And so part of that curriculum at the Binat Fellowship that you just mentioned, I mean, or in general, I mean, what do you think are some of the very top important elements of that are worth imparting on PhDs that are looking to pursue a more translational research and product development track?
So, I can talk about this for hours. Let me try and give you a succinct answer. I think there's a fundamental teaching that needs to take place when you're talking to a research professional about the difference between technology and execution. We see at aMoon, the fund that I am a partner in, we see about 1,800 investment opportunities a year. The vast majority of them include a very solid technological basis, an interesting, well-studied, well-characterized scientific basis. The thing is that that's almost always not enough. And in fact, it's really taking that technological underpinning and figuring out where to apply it, in which setting, to which audience, how are you going to be differentiated, and then executing on it and making sure you milk that technological innovation to the greatest impact potential. That's key. And so I think what we're trying to convey these researchers is that they must look at scientific discovery as the starting point, not the end point of translational work. And when you look at it as a starting point, you now can start adding layer about, value proposition, differentiation, competitive landscape, defensibility of your IP. So how long are you going to be able to defend and be differentiated and ahead of competition? What does a work plan look like? How do you budget something like this? How do you structure milestones in your development plans that correspond to true value inflection, to true de-risking, to advancing something from a concept level to a product or service level? All these things are things that we are trying to sort of embed in the program to sort of expand the thinking of researchers beyond, have I discovered something novel, to have I discovered something novel that I can now take to the next level in terms of execution and impact.
And is this stuff, obviously this is something that you might have wanted to exist when you were a PhD or postdoc. I mean, are these things that you learned during your MBA? Would you recommend an MBA to other PhDs that want to pursue this type of pathway?
So that's a great question. So this sort of ties into a little bit of my history. So when I finished my MBA and my postdoc, I went straight into industry. And what I learned was that an MBA is a program, at least the MBA that I acquired, was really a toolbox. And it wasn't until you sort of take the tools out of the toolbox and start, hammering at things and practicing things and building or taking apart things that you actually acquire the skill set. About 7 years later, I was approached by one of the major colleges here in Israel with a proposition to build the first MBA program directed at biomedical executives, folks that are either from the biotech industry or from the healthcare industry here. And that was the opportunity that I was waiting for, to really now be able to build a curriculum that would, on one hand, again, endow others with the toolbox, with the important toolbox that I acquired when I did my postdoc, while at the same time have that intimate face-to-face meeting with the true challenges of the industry, with the entrepreneurs and the innovators, with success stories and failures. I think there's, doing an MBA is a strong recommendation of mine. Anyone who I meet and asks me about this, I say, go get an MBA. It can happen at different times during life. For me, it happened sort of sooner. I know folks that do their MBAs later. I think you have to look at an MBA as sort of learning a new language. It almost doesn't matter which discipline you're in. This is going to open up areas for you. The way I've been describing it for 10 years to the students that have enrolled in this program that I started in 2010 was, it's like walking around life with an eye patch over one of your eyes, thinking that you are seeing everything. And in fact, what's happening is when you do the MBA, it's sort of taking off. It's sort of like taking off that eye patch, suddenly realizing that your field of vision has been limited, that there are texts and sounds and subtext and considerations and ideas and structures and thoughts that you may have missed in conversation or in life. This is what a good MBA program will endow you with, that ability to decipher, unseen code, subtext, to understand a language and considerations that without a good MBA education, you're missing. So I am a proponent of that. It can happen at different times during life, but I think everyone, not just researchers, everyone should really do that.
And is this something that differs from this, for instance, the fellowship that you discussed and the curriculum that these PhD students are getting? Like, is there a distinction between this MBA and this focused translational research toolbox that people can learn as well?
Yeah, look, the focus course that we are piloting now with Weitzman, and we're doing it, by the way, in next month with 3 research institutions in Australia as well. So we're conducting another pilot, more virtual based via Zoom. But these pilots are really meant as teasers. They're meant to sort of give a taste of this language and this opportunity set to folks. It's really not meant to supplement or replace a dedicated degree, if that's of interest to anyone. But it is meant to sort of make this world, this vocabulary, this set of considerations accessible to as many folks as possible. Not everyone can go do a 2-year executive MBA or a 1-year MBA. There are 100 different reasons why it's never a good time to do that, or why it's maybe too expensive. I think that again, I would strongly recommend people make the time. But even if they can't, being part of discussions that endow you with the ability to sort of use the vocabulary and use the methods and the structures and think about things in more business-like ways, is something that I think everyone should get an opportunity to experiment with.
And so you built this MBA program while working in industry, it sounds like. I mean, can you talk a little bit about your transition from PhD fellowship to industry and what that experience was like, and how you then transitioned into startups, entrepreneurship, new product development, things like that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a very winding road here for me. So when I finished my PhD at NYU, I came to Israel. This was year 2000, and I enrolled in a postdoc at the Weizmann Institute. I was very, again, privileged to have an American Cancer Society fellowship that allowed me to do a postdoctoral fellowship for 3 years. And it allowed me to also develop that sort of curiosity and fascination with the business world. And so in 2003, when I decided to stay in Israel, but not to pursue an academic track, I took a position in a young startup company that was working on cell therapy in Jerusalem, initially as the head of lab, but then very quickly moved to a business development function. I think, again, that is another sort of iteration of what happened to me in life as I sort of came out of the very specific, well-defined scientific area of expertise and migrated towards more managerial business development roles, because people realized that my passion was always not just in understanding very deeply the fundamentals of science, but then conveying those fundamentals to people who are not necessarily scientists, and then thinking of opportunities of how to take those scientific principles or findings and make something that is more broadly impactful from these findings. So I spent 14 years in industry after my postdoc, 10 years of which as CEO. In all cases, I sort of joined as the first-time CEO in a company, joined a scientific and many times entrepreneur, and helped build the company and run with it as far as it could go, or as far as I had the power to run with the company. I spent 10 years as CEO. In my last position as CEO in the industry, I took one of these companies public on NASDAQ and ran it for 4 years. So a good part of my post-academic life has been as a manager, as an operations person in early stage biotech companies, scraping my knees until they bled several times, learning from doing, and also learning from a lot of smart folks that I've been able to meet and engage and have them work with me or advise me as I was building these companies and taking products from the bench side to the clinical side. It was an amazing journey. That journey took another curve in 2017 when I was offered to head the Hebrew University Technology Transfer Company, which is called Yisum. I remember that sort of crossroad, and I remember myself sort of struggling with the thinking of going back a little bit to an academic setting. But what was dramatically appealing to me was the ability to now work not just with one researcher or on one idea, but in fact with hundreds of researchers and innovators and dozens of new companies, and also expand beyond my field of expertise, which was life science, into many different fields. So as the head of the tech transfer of Hebrew University, which is one of the oldest and certainly most prominent universities in Israel, if not in the world, I was privileged to work on food tech and ag tech and computer sciences and energy and materials, and of course, all areas of life sciences. I was fortunate enough to spin out about 40 companies in the 3 years that I was there, raised 3 seed venture funds that invested in building companies out of the Hebrew U, signed hundreds of licensing transactions with small and large organizations around the world. I always say I was a bit of a kid in a candy store there. And I actually thought I was going to stay there for a lot longer than I did, because at Tech Transfer, I found an opportunity to really sit at the crossroad of translational science and innovation, and really identifying some of the hurdles that block good science from becoming more generally impactful, and then figuring out ways to, surpass those hurdles, enable more technology to flow out of the university into the hands of entrepreneurs, and hopefully into becoming more impactful products and services. So going into this role, I was excited about it. Doing that role, I got even more excited about it. And I would have stayed there for probably a long time, if not for the very unique opportunity that came about 2.5 years ago to join aMoon.
And so Yasum is one of the best in the business. I have a bunch of questions about everything you just said. What are some of the hurdles that you think that you mentioned that you were working to overcome to get more research out of the lab and commercialized? Like, what are some of the high level hurdles, and how do you jump over them?
Right. So to me, there are 100 hurdles, but at the end of the day, there are three. There are just three. And the first is the issue of the maturity of the technology. So academic investigators predominantly are not in the business of taking an observation, taking a research discovery, and then through very validated methods, maturing it to the point where it's industry ready. And I'm not talking about a commercialized product, a final product, mass scale. That's never the case. But there is a gap. There is a sort of an inherent gap in terms of the maturity of a technology as it is normally incubated and grown in the university, to the minimal requirements that an industry partner or an innovator, an entrepreneur, or a fund would normally be willing to invest in or risk investment in. And that gap is a gap that needs to be filled. And maybe what I'll do, Max, is I'll first mention the three major areas, and then I'll give you an example of what I was trying to do, providing a solution to each one of these.
That'd be great. I'm probably going to even have questions about each one, but let's go the way you plan.
Okay, so I promise to pause after I describe the three, and then we can do solutions later. The second issue is about the structure of the technology transfer business itself. And here, there's a problem that's universal, but there's also a problem that's very specific to the Israeli ecosystem. And the Israeli ecosystem is quite remarkable because, I don't know if you know, but the first internal university technology transfer offices in the world were created in Israel. Yeda, which is the Weizmann TTO, and Yisum, which is the Hebrew U TTO, were the first TTOs in the world. They're 7 years old. The only one that outdates them is WARF in Wisconsin, and that was sort of an alumni organization. The first institutions, academic institutions in the world that created TTOs were the Israeli universities. The problem with that's wonderful, by the way, but the problem with that is the way Israel decided to build its TTO infrastructure was to have the not-for-profit universities own a for-profit subsidiary, a for-profit company that would commercialize the IP. And the inherent difficulty there is when you have a business that lives and breathes out of what they make, that business is always focused on near-term, short-term revenue instead of investing in long-term, high-risk potential, which is what tech transfer is about. And you start to create these tensions between innovators in industry that come to academia wanting to risk share with the university with the hopes of long-term returns, and a TTO that's really thinking day in, day out, how are they going to pay their employees? Because they don't have all the time in the world. And they know that for every 100 licensing transactions, maybe 1 or 2 will ever bear fruit. And so as a for-profit entity, the Israeli TTOs are incredibly challenged by their budget and by their near-term considerations. And that was something that honestly, only a business perspective can even sort of verbalize and elucidate and try to handle, right? The other element, if we're talking more universally about the challenge of TTO structure, is when you think about, the American system, for example, and the US has tremendous TTO heritage and successes, but many of the TTOs in the US are still struggling. And one of the reasons is the incentive system for actually doing deals. What is the incentive for a licensing officer that sits in University X in state Y to actually do a deal, to actually hurry up, to accelerate, to solve the problem, to negotiate, to compromise and do a deal instead of sitting back and waiting, 9 months until maybe a deal will be made? If you do not properly incentivize people to solve problems, they don't have a reason to do that. And when a TTO is part of the university and the licensing officer gets paid, irrespective of whether a deal is made or not, then guess what? The structure lacks incentives to actually transfer technology outside of the university. So that's the second major element. It's the inherent problematic structures of TTOs and their incentive systems. And the third has to do with the entrepreneur itself. And so scientists, by and large, 99 out of 100 academic innovators plan to stay academics. They don't want to be entrepreneurs. They are academic researchers. And by the way, that's great. That's how it should be. But then you sort of have these sparkles, these beginnings of things that really need a business leader, a counterpart to the academic innovator to join forces and take them forward. And those people are very, very hard to find. In an industry, in an ecosystem, for example, in Israel, where there's so much opportunity, large companies, smaller companies, tech companies, every entrepreneur, every accomplished entrepreneur has so many options and so many alternatives that they could make. Pausing in life, partnering with an academic innovator and sort of starting a journey that is incredibly high risk and not sure if it ever sort of has a reward at the end is very challenging. And so the talent issue, we'll call it the co-talent issue, the co-founder problem is a dramatic problem. What I found when I came into the TTO world after doing some work there and sort of crystallizing these three issues is if I was able to find mechanisms in which to help technologies in academia mature further, if I was able to build an incentive system for my staff to incentivize them to push technology out more efficiently, and if I was able to cultivate a base of co-founders and talented business leaders that could help me initiate those projects, I would be able to accelerate dramatically the pace of translational, commercializing academic innovation.
Let's get into the meat of the solutions.
Okay, so look, let's start with maturity of technologies. I was an advocate initially. So first, I was once again, I'm realizing now it's a recurring theme in my career, but I was very privileged to go into, like you said, one of the world's best TTOs. The YISUM, the Hebrew University TTO, has been fortunate to have several blockbuster drugs, as well as some awesome companies and technologies to come out of it. It had some reserves, and I was very focused on taking some of these reserves and allocating in a very specific and selective manner some funding, sort of POC funding, we called it, to technologies to make sure that we don't just throw money at a problem, but we throw money with a work plan. So for technologies that we thought were interesting, we went to industry, we validated what is the proof of concept, what is the POC that will require to mature that technology from a readiness level that it currently is into a readiness level that would be industry appropriate. And we then funded it out of pocket with the idea is that that money will come back. It will come back as our commercialization rates and success rates increase. Following that, I made a move on a national level to really have more funds on a national level be allocated to really supporting that early academic work. And in fact, I'm very proud to say that in Israel, look, it's not NIH or NSF or things like that, but Israel and the Israeli government appropriates, good amounts of money for academic technologies to establish those POCs and to really give great opportunities for the most promising technologies to meet industry and commercialization.
And how do you, so now you're talking about licensing to industry, which is great, but also how do you use POC funding to advance the technology to the point where an entrepreneur can then work to commercialize it? Like, it seems a little less realistic that there's one person saying, okay, I need to see it meet this, and this criteria in order for me to commit to it full time. I mean, how does it look on the entrepreneurial side if a technology is better suited for that?
So I think you're right. I think licensing is sort of an easier solution. By the way, it's a much less sort of cost-effective endeavor. The statistics out of Columbia University, for example, and they've done this research now at multiple top universities, is that really only 1 out of 100 licenses would ever bear fruit. So for a university like Hebrew U that does 100 licenses a year, that is not bad. But for most other universities, for example, in Israel, that don't come close to these number of licenses, that's sort of a losing battle from day one. So the focus has actually been predominantly on taking a technology to a point where it's attractive enough for an entrepreneur to join forces with the academic innovator and then go raise funds from early stage venture capital. And so what we would normally do is we would normally zero in on a technology that looks promising. And we can talk about, if you want, how do we know that a technology looks promising or not when you're in
Please,
tech transfer?
that would be great as a subset of this answer.
Yeah, but for a second, let's assume I know. And then what I do is I assemble a team that comes from industry that tells me, that specifically instructs me, what would they need to see to make this investable or attractive? So is it a preclinical model for a therapeutic, or is it an MVP for a digital product, or is it a prototype for a medical device, or is it an initial market study, whatever it is, and then what are the specifics around that, and then you would price it and fund it, get a project leader or something to oversee it, fund it, and you would have now an asset that's definitely more valuable than what you had before. Now going back to the,
but this is driven still by industry understanding the problem in a much deeper level than anybody else in the field. And so even in the startup spin-off commercialization pathway, it's still guided in some way by industry's understanding of the problem. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And you have to understand that whether you're talking about an entrepreneur or industry, at the end of the day, the entrepreneur will sell to industry, either sell the company or sell the product or service. So at the end of the day, the most observant members are the people who are working day in, day out in the markets, working on the problems, identifying what the tech challenges are, what the unsolved problems are, what the future holds in terms of the direction of certain technologies and use cases. And this goes to the question you asked me before, how would I know? It's because there is no one in the university that is more in touch with, on a regular basis, almost a daily basis, with the world, with industry, with the top decision makers of all the top companies, tech companies, pharma companies, bio companies, ad companies, they come to the TTO office all the time. They tell you what they want. They share with you their needs. If the TTO is only busy pushing things out and not busy projecting what they're hearing from the outside into the academic and research community, into what's the problem solvers, then they're not doing their job. The TTO is an amazing place where the only people who come there more often than the investigators are the people that are looking for solutions. At Hebrew U, we were visited daily by the largest organizations in the world that are looking to solve problems from food to climate to energy to health to traffic to anything, right? Because they're looking for deep science and discovery. And so if you take this and what you're doing is you then turn around, look at your shelf of IP and see if you have anything that maybe by chance hits the need, you're not doing your job. The TTO's job is to work the other way around. The TTO's job is to find ways to project to the research community, what is it that the world needs? What are the solutions? What are the hacks that the world it needs? And have those brilliant brains in academia, those that want to figure out a way in which their own research work can be applied, can be directed towards solving those needs.
I think that's an incredibly important point that you've made. And we can talk about industry and understanding problems at length, I think. But let's move forward to the incentivizing the TTO faculty.
Yeah. So I think, the trying to build a structure that makes sure that tech transfer professionals, which are, by the way, incredibly talented and very well-rounded individuals. Think about it. They have, on one hand, to converse with academics. As an academic, I can tell you, we're not the easiest people to converse with all the time. Then they have to understand the science. Then they have, at the same time, talk to industry and investors and entrepreneurs and understand them. Then they have to think about the deal and the deal structure and the deal finance. And then, by the way, even when the deal is signed, they sometimes engage and follow that deal for many, many years, solving problems, connecting, creating opportunities, etc. So I think, making sure that there is an adequate incentive for the TTO not to think near term, not to try and maximize every deal, even if it would take another 6 months to negotiate, but understand that it's not about a single deal. We have no idea whether a single deal will be the next, Mobileye or the next Cherry Tomatoes or not. What we can do is make sure that as much of the technology that is possible is handed off to the best entrepreneurial hands. It could be industry, it could be entrepreneurs, as possible. And then you want to incentivize the system to do that. And the way we've done that is twofold. First, we've taken another look at how licensing officers are rewarded. And unfortunately, I can't get into too much detail here, but we did things that are not traditional in the tech transfer world, because in the most of the tech transfer world, these are university employees. The flexibility that the Israeli system allows, because it's a for-profit company, the tech transfer really allowed us to think about incentivizing tech transfer officers to be problem solvers and translation enablers instead of guardians of the IP and negotiators. But on a national level, we also did something, and we worked as a group. I was also very happy to co-chair an organization called ITTN, the Israeli Tech Transfer Network. It was the umbrella organization of all the Israeli tech transfer offices, hospitals, research institutions, universities. And we worked with the government to really take another look at the structure, at the funding of TTOs, and make sure that a large part of the day-to-day operational budget of TTOs is secured by the parent organization and by the government, so that the TTO is not worried about feeding its people or firing people or giving the lowest wage possible. We wanted to make sure that there's some sort of a basal level of function that every academic institution can sustain, irregardless of how fast they're able to get back some money from commercialization. We wanted them to shift their focus from near-term, cash on hand thinking to long-term risk sharing, moonshot thinking. And that was partly by changing the internal incentivizing system, and partly by ensuring that TTOs are not worried that money's going to run out at the end of the year and everyone's going to go home.
And just to go back for a second, there was something you also said about increasing the volume of licensing deals. I mean, is that something? I realize that all of these things that you just said about incentivizing and making sure that they have the budget to do this, that can help increase the volume. But is it really something that simple to just say that if a TTO can actually bring up the volume of licensing deals from 5 to 100, then they are more likely to have a blockbuster? Everything is tail, all of the best results are tail results?
Yeah, first of all, fundamentally, the answer is yes. Fundamentally, the answer is yes. There is no chance that if you make 5 deals a year, you're gonna be able to sustain tech transfer operations for a long time. You have to do it in volume. Now, doing it in volume is a lot of that depends on incentivizing your officers to do that, but there are other solutions. For example, what we did is we put template agreements online. So instead of spending months in negotiating initial templates, I've worked with 3 of the top law offices in Israel to come up with a template license agreement or option agreements or services agreements that are acceptable and should be acceptable to all parties. And we, to the best of our capabilities, use those template agreements. We also connected to a database of licensing terms. So there are several global databases in which TTOs upload the agreement terms, so that when you offer terms of a certain deal, the other party will always come back and say, are you nuts? That's sort of not market. That's the royalty rate is too high. The upfront is too high. So what we try to do is we try to educate ourselves about what is the going rate for certain amounts, so that our initial templates or initial offerings would be reasonable. And again, there isn't a single hack to this, but when you start thinking about, you start changing the mind frame from fight on every deal, maximize returns, near-term returns for every deal, to fight on making as many deals, risk share with a partner, because very few of them will be successful, and therefore you want as many of them to happen. Then it changes. Like there's just a change. And I think it's online at the YISUM website, but I think the first year, after the first year that I was at YISUM, the number of licenses doubled. The number of companies that we created, I think, tripled. There was just a flooding. Because, and by the way, let me tell you something that people always laugh when I say. You know who was happiest about this whole thing? The tech transfer people, the tech transfer offices. If you think it's fun to fight with with an entrepreneur or with an industry, licensing officer, and be perceived as being difficult and challenging and not understanding and out of touch, nobody likes to do that. There was no one happier than the licensing officers of YISUM, having now done, instead of 2 or 3 or 4 deals a year, doing 12 or 15 deals a year. It was incredibly empowering, and they felt the impact. They felt the impact on our sort of within campus and on Jerusalem, and in fact, broader than that. We saw our technologies and our products moving forward, and that was the greatest reward.
We could drill into this even further. I want to move to the third problem and solution is getting more entrepreneurs, getting that business expertise to join the technical inventor and in order to create more startups. So how did you attack that in your tenure at aMoon, and in general, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think it's important to know that this is by far the hardest problem to crack. Talent in general is always the hardest problem to crack, especially in ecosystems like Israel, and there are others around the world where the supply and demand equation is so heavily tilted towards demand. There's never enough people. There are never enough people. They never have enough bandwidth, and it's incredibly challenging to do. What we were able to do are two things. We were able to, number one, build a system, a contracting system that was able to reserve a lot of upside and a lot of equity as a reward to the co-founder. So we realized that although we own the IP and that the discovery was created in our premises, in the university premises, the joining of a skilled entrepreneur was a do or die, was a binary determinant into whether this thing is going to actually be valuable or not. I'm quoted as saying, even if you had 10,000 patents buried in a vault under the mountains of Jerusalem at Hebrew U, the total value of that IP would be $0. The only way IP has value is if it goes out and works and makes money. And so we realized that if we were not able to build a structure that both academic innovators and their co-founder entrepreneurs would hold meaningful equity stakes, have meaningful upside in the future of the company, then we would be not attractive for anyone to come. So we've actually changed university rules to limit the amount of equity, the ownership of the university in any sort of new discovery that gives rise to a new company, and sort of free up space and upside to the entrepreneur. And I'm glad to say that although this was challenging, and I even got a couple of threatening phone calls back in the days, pretty much every single university in Israel have adapted their bylaws, their guidelines to align with the Hebrew University's guidelines since. And that's remarkable.
Is there a rule of thumb, a standard percentage that you can share?
There isn't a rule of thumb, but I would say that whereas generally in the old days, universities wanted 1/2 of any company that came out of the university, which would be, just by virtue of having the IP, right? Not investing a single dollar. There are now caps that are low double digits. Could be anywhere from, well, some of them actually are single digits. So it could be anywhere from 5% in the most progressive institutions to 20% for those who are sort of, still claiming a large stake. But that's still dramatically lower than where things were only 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay, great. And how else would you so that's the incentivizing.
That's the incentivizing. Yeah. The second element is just opening the gates and bringing them in. So many of the universities did not allow companies, did not allow entrepreneurs to come work on campus, to come work in the lab, to come spend time with the innovator and sort of build up the company from within. Hebrew U has been a pioneer. Actually, it was the only university back then that had a full high-tech campus on campus. So there were about 100 companies working on campus with the students, with the faculty members. We actually, again, expanded that, opened the gates, and allowed, based on, again, changing some of the IP rules, for industry to come into campus, for industry to work with a campus. We've sort of changed or updated. We updated the terms of IP Industry was always worried that if they did something on campus, university could hold hostage the new IP. We fixed those. And I think the opening of the campus to innovators, entrepreneurs, and industry, and the simplification of the IP rules allows more people to sort of become intimately familiar with the amazing research that's done. The other sort of small things is, like I mentioned before, put everything online. We've developed a site that now, again, most other universities have, that puts all 1,000 Hebrew U academics at the tips of your fingers. You can search. If you want to, study who's doing work on psychedelics, you don't have to go and start reading papers. You can go to the website of the TTO and write psychedelics. You can get alerts to your smartphones every time there's a new technology or a new researcher in psychedelics. So just making that interface easier, more accessible, more understandable to people, lowering the barriers that normally exist between academic research and innovation.
And is there anything you wish you could have done to inspire and get more entrepreneurs to see this as a viable pathway? Or is there anything you're doing now in your current role at aMoon Fund that is related to this in any way that you want to mention?
Yeah. So at aMoon, which is the largest health tech fund in Israel, we manage 1.3 billion US dollars. We're a global healthcare fund, but we're headquartered here in Israel. I lead investments, co-lead investments in the early stage fund of aMoon. We call that fund aMoon Velocity. 2/3 of the companies that we've invested in at aMoon Velocity today have been academic spinouts. They have been companies in which we as a fund went into the university, identified the interesting research, and built together with the TTO a new company. This is something that I think is quite unique in Israel for venture funds. Most venture funds still feel very reluctant to interact directly with TTOs. They are less familiar with the incentive system, with the guidelines, with the issues of IP and how to maneuver them. They're also potentially less connected to potential entrepreneurs that they could bring to lead the project. When we built aMoon Velocity, we built it with the purpose of going to places where others have not gone, to finding those rare gems in academia and in sort of research institutions and hospitals, and to work with those academic founders to make sure that the impact that's sort of hidden or trapped within their academic work can come out. And so I think, there's nothing that I, regret not doing at ISUM. The only thing I regret is not having maybe another, 5-10 years there to sort of see some of the bigger fruits of the changes that we've implemented. But I have to say, I'm delighted to see, the progress that have been made at ISUM and at other TTOs since then. And what I'm doing, and the reason I came here, is to do my part sort of on the other side of the fence, to play ball with these guys, because it takes two to tango, and the TTO can do a lot. But if the industry and if the venture funds are unwilling to engage or are worried about or concerned about engaging, it won't work. And so what we try to do is lead the charge now on the other side of the fence to sort of build more impactful, scientific, innovative startups out of academia.
Yaron, this has been excellent. I want to be respectful of your time. Any words of wisdom that you would impart on entrepreneurs, PhDs, grad students about this topic in any way? Something, advice, anything?
I want to say that the TTO over the years have become sort of a contentious place. Many feel a very hard place to be associated with or to work with. I want to tell you, as someone who has been within and outside of the TTO, that good TTOs are one of the most amazing places to learn about business and to do business, and with them to impact society. And so if it's students or postdocs, I would encourage you to investigate and to be in touch with the TTOs in your organization and to use it as a platform to learn more about how the world works and how commercialization works. And for my colleagues on the buy side, investors, entrepreneurs in industry, doesn't matter how challenging a previous interaction may have been, doesn't matter how, what nightmare stories have you heard from a past colleague. TTOs are evolving, the discipline is evolving, and I would encourage everyone to go into campus and find sort of your next investment opportunity there.
Yaron, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they want to reach out or be in touch?
Oh, so I'd love for people to reach out and be in touch. Easiest thing is by mail at Yaron at aMoon, AMOON.fund.
Yaron Daniely from aMoon Fund, thank you so much for joining. Everyone visit bountiful.work, W-O-R-K, to join our community. And thank you for listening.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks for listening. But now we need your help. We're building a community of scientists, students, entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and investors to commercialize meaningful technology and research. Join us at bountiful.work today to find opportunities and realize your power to save the world.